I used to believe that the worst thing that could ever happen to a kid was failing a math test or forgetting their homework at home. I used to think life was predictable, even a little boring sometimes. But all of that changed the day I came home from school at 13 years old and realized my world had quietly fallen apart while I was still sitting in my English class. It's strange how life gives you no warning before it takes a sharp turn. One minute you're laughing with your friends and the next you're standing in an empty house that suddenly feels too quiet, too still, almost like it's holding its breath. That afternoon, I remember dragging my school bag behind me, kicking the small stones on the driveway like I always did. The gate was unlocked, but I didn't think much of it. My parents usually kept the door open around the time I got home. But when I stepped inside, a chill ran down my spine. The house didn't smell like the usual mix of my mom's hand lotion and whatever my dad cooked for lunch. It just smelled empty. Like no one had been there for hours. Maybe even longer. I called out for my mom first, because she always answered even if she was on a call or busy with something. But my voice bounced back at me instead, echoing through the hallway. Then I called for my dad. Nothing. For a second, I convinced myself they had just stepped out to run an errand. Maybe they took the car to get groceries. Maybe the Wi-Fi went out and they went to complain about it like they always did. I was 13. I didn't panic easily. But something in the air felt wrong. I walked through the living room. Everything looked normal, but also not normal at all. The picture frames were still there. The TV remote was still in the same spot. But the energy in the house, the warmth I had known all my life, was gone. I checked their room next, expecting to see my mom folding clothes or my dad checking emails. Instead, the closet doors were wide open like someone had rushed through them. Half the hangers were empty. The drawers weren't fully closed. It hit me slowly like sinking into cold water. Some things were missing. But I still didn't understand. Not until I went to the kitchen and saw it. An envelope sitting perfectly in the center of the table with my name written on the front in my mother's handwriting. She always curved the A in my name too much, making it look like a tiny mountain. My heart started pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I knew, without even touching it, that whatever was inside was going to change everything. I stared at that envelope for a long time. I was too scared to open it, too scared to know. At 13, you don't expect to face something that feels bigger than you. You don't expect to walk into your house and find a letter instead of your parents. When I finally picked it up, my hands were shaking. The paper felt heavy. Heavier than a letter should ever feel. I opened it slowly, trying to control my breathing. A part of me hoped it was something silly, maybe an apology because they had gone out and would be back soon. But the moment I saw the first line, everything inside me froze. "We're sorry." Just those two words. Nothing dramatic. Nothing confusing. But the kind of sorry that feels final. The kind of sorry that feels like a goodbye. I kept reading, each line more unbelievable than the last. They said they had to leave the country. They said it was for safety. They said they didn't have time to explain. They said they loved me and that this was the only way. And then the sentence that replayed in my mind for years. "You're safer without us." I didn't understand. Not then. How could a 13-year-old understand anything like that? My legs went weak and I sat in the nearest chair. I read the letter over and over, hoping I had misunderstood something, hoping maybe it was a prank or a mistake. But it wasn't a joke. It wasn't a mistake. It was real. My parents were gone. They had left the country, left me without saying goodbye. The first wave that hit me was confusion. Then fear. Then anger. Then a kind of emptiness I didn't know could exist inside a person. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call someone. But who? I didn't know what to tell anyone. I didn't know the truth myself. I only had their words written in rushed handwriting, like they didn't even have time to breathe while writing it. I walked around the house again, more slowly this time. I started noticing the details I had missed at first. The box missing from the top shelf, the empty spaces where their suitcases used to be, the faint smell of my mom's perfume lingering in the hallway as if she had just passed through. I touched their door frame, the one my dad had painted himself. I sat on the edge of their bed. Everything felt like a memory already. I didn't cry right away. The shock held me still. It wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. But the fear kept growing. What did they mean by safety? Who was I unsafe from? Why didn't they take me with them? Why didn't they trust me with the truth? As the evening went on, the silence only got louder. The shadows stretched longer. And every small sound, cars passing outside, the door creaking as the wind moved it, made my heart jump. I felt like I was being watched, but maybe it was just my imagination. Or maybe it wasn't. I didn't know what to think anymore. All I knew was that I was alone. And the letter, lying on the table under the dim kitchen light, seemed to hold answers I wasn't ready to face. Later that night, something else happened. Something that made the mystery even deeper. Something that made me question everything my parents had written in that letter. Something that made me realize their disappearance wasn't just a sudden decision. It might have been part of something much bigger. But before I tell you what happened after sunset, before I explain the clue that changed everything, I need you to understand one thing. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about the letter lying on the kitchen table, the one that felt heavier than anything I had ever held. Every time I closed my eyes, those words flashed in my mind, "You're safer without us." I didn't understand how a sentence could feel so cold and loving at the same time. I must have read it at least 20 times, searching for hidden meanings, clues between the lines, something, anything, that would explain why two parents would leave their child behind without warning. At some point, the house became so quiet it made my skin crawl. I kept telling myself it was just a normal night, but my mind wouldn't settle. Every shadow looked strange. Every creak sounded like someone walking just outside my room. I knew I was being paranoid, but when you're 13 and your whole world falls apart in one afternoon, you're allowed to be scared. It was around midnight when I heard the sound. It wasn't loud, just a soft click. Like someone opening the gate outside. My heart skipped. I sat up in bed and held my breath. I wanted to believe I had imagined it. But then I heard it again, something brushing against the gravel in our driveway. Slow. Careful. Not the kind of sound someone makes when they're supposed to be there. I slipped out of bed and peeked through the curtains. The yard was dark except for the weak street light near the corner. I didn't see anyone. But the gate, it was slightly open. I remembered closing it earlier. Or at least I thought I did. Maybe I hadn't. Maybe someone opened it. I didn't know what to think anymore. I stayed awake until the first light of morning. When the sun finally came up, the house didn't feel safe, but it felt less threatening. I walked to the kitchen again, partly hoping the letter had magically changed overnight. But it was still the same, sitting in the same spot, staring back at me like a reminder that nothing about today would be normal. I needed context. Answers. Something to ground me. So I started looking around the house for anything unusual, something that would explain why my parents thought I'd be safer, alone. I checked their room again. Clothes were missing, but some important things were still there. My mom's favorite scarf. My dad's old laptop bag. Their passports were gone. All of them. Even the spare ones. That made my stomach twist. Leaving the country wasn't a small decision. They had planned this. Carefully. But they hadn't planned to tell me. The more I looked around, the more I realized how carefully they had chosen what to take and what to leave behind. It almost felt like they wanted the house to look normal at first glance. As if they didn't want anyone to know they were gone. Not even me. There was something else too, something subtle. Their photo albums were gone. Not all of them, but the ones from the years before I was born. The ones they kept in the top drawer of their closet. I noticed the empty space immediately. It was dusty around the edges except for a clean rectangle where the albums had been. They took those. Why those? Why not the more recent ones? The missing pieces didn't make sense. And the more I tried to put them together, the more confused I became. By mid-morning, I couldn't stop thinking about that sound from last night. What if someone really had come to the house? What if my parents knew someone was after them? The thought made my chest tighten. I needed help. But I didn't know who to call. If I called the authorities and said, "My parents left the country and I don't know why," they'd ask questions I didn't have answers to. Worse, what if telling someone put me in danger too? I remembered something then, a conversation I once overheard between my parents. I didn't think much of it at the time because adults always talk about confusing things. But now it sounded different in my memory. They were whispering in the kitchen late one night. My mom said, "We need more time." And my dad said, "Time is the one thing we don't have." I shrugged it off back then, thinking they were talking about bills or work stress. But now, it felt like a puzzle piece I didn't know how to place. I spent the rest of the morning just sitting on the living room floor, hugging my knees and staring at the wall. I felt small. Lost. So much had changed in just one night. I kept thinking about school too. No one there knew anything. My teachers thought everything was normal at home. My friends had no idea. And I didn't want anyone to look at me with pity or worry. So I made the hardest decision I could make at 13. I stayed quiet. But silence didn't fix anything. It only made everything feel heavier. Around noon I went outside to get some fresh air. The yard looked the same as always, but I didn't feel the same inside it. I kept looking at the gate, trying to figure out whether it had been opened by someone or just the wind. I checked the lock. It didn't look broken. But the latch seemed slightly bent. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to make me wonder. I walked back inside and decided to check the garage. That's when I noticed something strange. my dad's old toolbox was open on the floor. Tools were scattered everywhere like someone had looked through it in a hurry. My dad never left tools out. He was the kind of person who organized his screws by size. Seeing the toolbox like that felt wrong. I knelt down and looked closely. There were footprints near it. Not mine. They were bigger. Heavier. Maybe my dad's? Maybe not. My heart beat faster. The footprints led toward the side door of the garage, the one my parents rarely used. I followed them step by step until I reached the door. The doorknob had scratches on it. Fresh ones. Someone had tried to force it open. I backed away, suddenly feeling cold even though the day was warm. Someone had been there. Not last week. Not months ago. Recently. Maybe even last night. And maybe that was why my parents left. The thought hit me like a punch. If someone dangerous had been watching our house, if someone had been trying to break in, then my parents didn't leave me because they didn't love me. They left me because they thought leaving was the only way to keep me safe. But safe from what? I went back to the kitchen and stared at the letter again. Felt different now. Heavier with meaning. My eyes kept going to the last part, where my parents had written, "We will explain everything when the time is right." But what did that mean? How long would it be? Were they planning to come back? Or was this goodbye forever? I sat down, resting my forehead against the table. Everything inside me felt tangled. Fear. Confusion. Anger. Hope. It was all mixed together. But there was another feeling too, one I hadn't expected. Curiosity. As scared as I was, part of me needed to know the truth. I needed to understand what my parents were hiding, what danger they thought was coming, and why they believed I'd be safer alone. Just as that thought crossed my mind, something happened that made the mystery even deeper. Something small. Something easy to miss. But something that made my whole body tense. My phone buzzed. A message. From a number I didn't know. 3 words. Nothing more. Don't trust anyone. I stared at the screen, frozen. My hands started shaking again, but this time it wasn't because of sadness. It was because the mystery wasn't just about my parents anymore. Someone else knew. Someone who wasn't supposed to. And I had no idea whether they were trying to protect me, or warn me, or scare me. I kept staring at the message on my phone, reading it again and again as if the words would somehow change. Don't trust anyone. 3 simple words, but they felt like they were wrapped in fire. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out every other sound in the room. For a moment I thought maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone from school got a hold of my number and decided to mess with me. But something about the timing, something about the fear that had been building since yesterday, told me this wasn't a joke. I wanted to reply, but what would I even say? Who are you? How do you know what's happening? Do you know where my parents are? The questions crowded my mind, but my fingers wouldn't move. I felt frozen again, trapped between wanting answers and being terrified of the answers I might get. Instead of replying, I turned the phone face down on the table. I didn't want to see the message anymore, but the words kept echoing in my mind. Don't trust anyone. Anyone. Did that include my neighbors? My teachers? My friends? I didn't know how far this mystery went or who was involved, and the more I thought about it, the more the world felt unstable, like someone had tilted it slightly and I was trying to keep my balance. I knew I had to make a decision. I could ignore everything and pretend my life was still normal, or I could try to understand what was happening behind the scenes even if it scared me. At 13 that felt like too big a choice to make, but it wasn't like I had a real option. The mystery was already pulling me in whether I wanted it to or not. By late afternoon I finally worked up the courage to go back to the garage. The footprints were still there and the air smelled like dust and something metallic. I stood quietly, listening for any sounds from outside. Nothing. I crouched down near the toolbox again, scanning the floor for details I might have missed in my panic earlier. That's when I noticed something odd, the smallest thing, yet impossible to ignore. A piece of paper sticking out from behind the old wooden shelf. I reached for it slowly. It was folded neatly like someone had placed it there on purpose. My stomach tightened as I unfolded it. It wasn't a letter exactly, but some kind of receipt. Foreign writing. A stamp from another country. A date. Yesterday's date. My breath caught. My parents had left the country yesterday. And this paper, it must have been connected somehow. But how did it end up in the garage? Did they drop it? Or did the person trying to break and leave it behind without noticing? I slipped the receipt into my pocket and stepped back. My head was spinning. The more clues I found, the more questions I had. Nothing connected in a straight line. It felt like trying to do a puzzle without knowing what the picture was supposed to look like. Later, when I walked back into the house, I thought about calling my aunt. She lived a few hours away and had always been kind to me. If anyone could help, it would be her. But the message, don't trust anyone. I didn't know if that warning was about strangers or everyone around me. And what if my aunt didn't know anything? Or worse, what if she knew too much? I hated thinking like that, but everything in my life suddenly felt suspicious. To distract myself, I went through more rooms in the house. In my parents' study, I found their computer still sitting on the desk. The screen was dark, but when I touched the mouse, it lit up. Password locked. Of course it was. I tried my birthday first because parents always use their kids' birthdays for stuff, right? Wrong. I tried the dog we used to have when I was little. No luck. I tried my mom's favorite flower. Still nothing. I sighed and leaned back in the chair. The computer was probably full of answers, but I couldn't get inside. Not yet. But while I was sitting there, something on the desk caught my eye. A small black notebook, half tucked under a stack of bills. I pulled it out and flipped through it. Mostly grocery lists, phone numbers, reminders, nothing strange. But near the back, a single page had been torn out. Only the edges remained, ripped unevenly. I ran my fingers over the torn edge. Whatever had been written there, my parents didn't want it found. And something about that made my chest feel heavy. Secrets. Everywhere I looked, there were more secrets. I closed the notebook and went to the window. Our street looked normal, kids playing outside, a woman talking on the phone while walking her dog, a man washing his car. It was almost impossible to believe that behind all of this normal life, something dangerous might be happening. Something that had forced my parents to disappear. A car drove slowly past our house. I wouldn't have noticed it normally, but it moved too slowly, like the driver was looking for something, or someone. The windows were tinted and I couldn't see inside. When the car reached the corner, it turned, but not smoothly. More like the driver was watching the side mirror. Watching the house. I stepped back from the window so quickly I bumped into the desk. My heart raced again. Was someone checking on the house? Had they been last night too? Was this connected to the warning text? I crouched on the floor beneath the window, holding my breath. The car didn't return, but the fear didn't leave either. I felt like I was standing in the middle of a maze with no map, and danger lurking behind every turn. I decided to keep the house lights dim. Just in case. As evening crept in again, the fear settled deeper, but something else settled next to it, a kind of determination. I didn't choose this, but it was happening, and hiding wouldn't make it go away. I needed to keep searching for answers, even if each answer led to more confusion. Before bed, I checked my phone again. No new messages. The earlier one still sat there, glowing on the screen like a threat or a warning, or maybe both. I finally forced myself to turn the phone off. But the moment I lay down, another memory came back. A small one. The kind of memory you normally forget until life suddenly makes it important. A few months earlier, my parents had received a letter in the mail. They were arguing about whether to throw it away or keep it. I remember my mom saying, "We can't risk it," and my dad whispering, "We don't have a choice anymore." When I walked in, they stopped talking instantly and pretended it was nothing. Now I wondered if that letter had been the beginning of all of this. Maybe the first sign of danger. Maybe the reason they started planning their escape. I turned onto my side, staring at the wall, and I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. The missing albums. The torn notebook page. The footprints. The warning message. The strange car. Every piece felt like part of a story I wasn't supposed to know. A secret world my parents had lived in without me realizing. But there was one question that echoed louder than all the others. If someone was after them, were they also after me? I tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Not with that question haunting the darkness. Not with the feeling that someone, somewhere, was closer than I realized. And as the clock on my nightstand glowed softly in the dark, something told me the worst part hadn't even started yet. I must have drifted off at some point, because the next thing I remember was waking up to a strange noise. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to snap me out of sleep instantly. A faint tapping. Rhythmic. Careful. Too intentional to be the wind. For a moment, I just lay there, frozen in the darkness, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Then I heard it again, this time closer. On the window. My whole body went cold. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Slowly, I turned my head toward the curtains. The tapping stopped. Silence pressed in around me. I waited, counting the seconds in my mind. Nothing. I told myself I imagined it. Maybe it was a tree branch. Maybe an animal. My imagination had been running wild for days, so it wouldn't be surprising. But then it started again. 3 slow taps. Pause. 2 more. It was deliberate. I scrambled quietly out of bed, keeping low to the ground, and crawled to the corner of the room where the shadows were thickest. My hands were trembling. I waited. The tapping stopped again. This time the silence felt worse than the sound. I didn't dare look out the window. I didn't want to see what, or who, was out there. After a long minute, I forced myself to stand and make my way to the hallway. The air felt heavy, like the house was holding more secrets than walls. I made my way to the living room, my footsteps slow and light. All the curtains were drawn. The house felt closed in, like a ship sealed against a storm. I sat on the couch, hugging my legs to my chest, and waited for my heartbeat to calm down. It never fully did. The dim light from the street lamp outside cast different shadows on the walls, and my mind started connecting them to everything that had happened. The warning text, the footprints, the strange car, the torn page, the missing photos, the mysterious receipt. Everything felt connected, like a web tightening around me. When the sun finally rose, I felt like I hadn't rested at all. My body was awake, but my mind was running on fear. I checked my phone again as soon as I could. Still no messages. A small part of me wanted that unknown number to text again just so I'd know someone was out there watching over me. But another part of me didn't want any more strange warnings. I had enough to worry about. Instead, I focused on the receipt in my pocket. I took it out and studied it more carefully. There was a stamp from a foreign airport and a scribbled code I didn't recognize. I tried searching for it on my dad's old laptop, but the machine took forever to turn on and barely worked. Even then, it couldn't connect to anything. It felt almost symbolic, like every path to answers was blocked. I thought about going outside and asking the neighbors if they heard or saw anything unusual, but the warning message kept flashing in my mind. Don't trust anyone. I didn't know if it meant everyone or someone specific, but I couldn't take that risk. By noon, the house felt too small, too quiet, almost suffocating. I paced between rooms trying to think. The mystery surrounding my parents wasn't something simple like money trouble or a sudden family emergency. Something bigger was hiding underneath. Something dangerous. Eventually, I went back to their room again, searching for anything I might have overlooked. I checked the bottom drawers, the shelves, even behind the bed. Something had to explain why they left, why someone had tried to break in, why I had a warning message from a stranger. It wasn't until I stood in front of the closet again that I noticed it, a small wooden box pushed far into the corner, almost invisible behind a stack of folded blankets. I pulled it out slowly. It was heavier than it looked, with a tiny lock on the front. My chest tightened. This felt important. The lock wasn't strong. After a few minutes of searching in the kitchen drawers, I found a thin metal tool and managed to pop it open. Inside were documents, photos, and something like a keycard, printed with a symbol I had never seen before. The kind of symbol that didn't look like it belonged to anything normal. My hands shook as I sorted through the papers. Most of them were covered in codes and notes that made no sense to me. Hidden messages. Numbers. Sketches. My parents' handwriting, but sharp, rushed, nothing like the calm lists they used to write. The more I flipped through the box, the more unsettled I felt. Then I found a picture. It was an old one, older than me. My parents were younger, standing next to two people I didn't recognize. All four of them were wearing badges around their necks with that same strange symbol. Behind them was a building I had never seen before. It wasn't a place you forget. It looked almost like a research center with tall metal structures and a cold, industrial design. And there, scribbled on the back of the photo, were words that made every hair on my body stand up. Never let this fall into the wrong hands. My heartbeat slowed, then sped up again. The truth wasn't just hidden, it was dangerous. I didn't know who the wrong hands were, but I was starting to understand why my parents ran. Maybe they had been involved in something long before I was born, something they'd been trying to escape ever since. Something that finally caught up with them. Something that might now be looking for me. Before I could process anything else, I heard a sound that made me freeze again. A car door slamming outside. Not gentle. Not casual. Art. Purposeful. I rushed to the window and gently peeked through the curtain. A black SUV was parked right in front of our house. Not one of the neighbors' cars. I had never seen it before. The windows were tinted. The engine was still running. My knees went weak. Someone stepped out of the SUV. A tall figure. Dressed in dark clothing. They didn't walk to any house. They didn't check their phone. They walked straight toward mine. I stumbled back from the window trying to steady my breath. My heart was racing so fast it hurt. The person moved with certainty, like they knew exactly where they were going. Exactly who they were coming for. The doorbell rang. Sure. Echoing through the house like a shot. I didn't move. The bell rang again. Harder this time. My hands were sweating. My mind screamed at me to stay quiet, stay still. Whoever was at the door wasn't there to ask for directions. And then as I backed away, my phone lit up again. Another message. Same unknown number. They're at your door. Don't open it. My whole body trembled. Whoever was texting me knew more than I did, maybe more than my parents had ever told me. The doorbell rang again, followed by a slow, heavy knock. The kind that didn't ask permission. The house felt like a trap. The walls felt like they were closing in. And for the first time since this began, I truly felt the danger my parents had tried to protect me from. The knock echoed again, longer, louder, like the final warning before something broke. And I realized, whoever was on the other side wasn't leaving until they got what they came for. The knocking grew louder, shaking the thin wooden door like whoever stood outside had all the time in the world, and no reason to be patient. I backed deeper into the hallway, gripping the phone in my hand so tightly my fingers hurt. My breath came short and uneven. The house felt smaller and smaller with every thud, like I was being cornered by something I couldn't see. Then the knocking stopped. Silence. A silence so sudden it felt wrong. I waited, listening. Every heartbeat felt like an explosion in my ears. Maybe they left. Maybe they gave up. Maybe they... A shadow moved under the door. Someone was still there. I clamped a hand over my mouth, trying not to make a sound. I felt like any tiny noise could give me away. Then, just as I thought the person might try forcing the door open, my phone buzzed in my hand again. I nearly dropped it. Another message from the same unknown number. Go to the back. Now. I didn't even have time to think about whether to trust it. The instinct to survive hit me hard. I moved quietly toward the kitchen, every step slow and careful. I didn't turn on any lights. I didn't want whoever was at the door to know I was moving. The back door led to the yard behind the house. Usually it was peaceful, just grass, a small shed, the old clothesline, nothing special. But tonight it felt like a different world. A darker one. I unlocked the door as quietly as possible and slipped outside. The air was cold and the ground felt damp. I tried to run, but my legs shook so badly I could barely move. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone following me, but the yard was empty. That was when I noticed the movement near the shed. A figure stepped out from the shadows. I stumbled back, ready to run toward the fence, but the person held up both hands. Wait, they whispered. The voice was low, urgent, but not threatening. Still I stayed ready to bolt. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear. I sent the messages, the person said. My breath caught in my throat. So this was the one who knew everything. The one who warned me. But seeing them in the dark like this made my skin crawl. They were wearing a hooded jacket. I couldn't see their face clearly, just the outline beneath the hood. They stepped closer and I took a step back. I didn't know if I should trust them. I didn't even know if their warnings were real or part of something worse. You don't know me yet, they continued, but I knew your parents. The words hit me harder than the cold air. You what? My voice cracked. They asked me to watch over you, the person said, in case something like this happened. A part of me wanted to believe them so badly it hurt. Another part screamed not to. My mind kept flashing back to the message, don't trust anyone. What do you mean, something like this? I whispered. The person hesitated, like they were choosing their words carefully. Your parents weren't who you thought they were. They were involved in something important. Something dangerous. My stomach twisted. I took another step back. What kind of dangerous? Before they could answer, a loud crash came from the front of the house. Wood splintering, something slamming hard against the entryway. The person turned sharply, looking toward the noise. They're inside, they whispered. We have to go. My knees nearly buckled. Someone had broken in. Someone was in my house right now. I felt my whole body tremble. Who are they? I whispered. The person didn't look at me. Their eyes stayed fixed on the house. People your parents trusted, once. But not anymore. A new wave of fear hit me so hard I felt dizzy. People my parents trusted? What did that even mean? Friends? Coworkers? Someone from their past? Before I could ask more, the person grabbed my wrist, not tightly but firmly enough to pull me toward the back gate. We need to move, they said. Now. I didn't resist. My legs just followed even though my mind was spinning. We went toward the far end of the yard where an old wooden fence separated our property from the narrow alley behind it. We can't outrun them, the person said quietly. But we can stay ahead of them. Their words made my pulse jump. Stay ahead? From who? Why were they after us? The person unlocked a small latch hidden beneath a loose board in the fence. It swung open like a secret exit. I had lived here my whole life and never knew it existed. My parents must have known. They must have installed it. But why? We slipped through and the person closed it silently behind us. The alley was dark, lit only by a flickering streetlight at the far end. We moved quickly, staying close to the wall. What do they want? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The person glanced at me. Something your parents protected. Something they refused to hand over. My mind rushed back to the wooden box. The documents. The strange keycard. The photo with the symbol. The message on the back. Never let this fall into the wrong hands. Is it about that? I whispered. Yes, the person said. And if they think your parents told you anything, you're in danger too. My chest tightened like someone was squeezing it. I didn't know anything. I didn't even know what I was supposed to know. What are they? I asked. Criminals? Agents? What? The person didn't answer immediately, and that terrified me more than anything else. Finally they said, not criminals. Not agents. Something in between. That didn't help at all. If anything, it made everything worse. We reached the end of the alley, but before the person could lead me out onto the street, their phone buzzed. They read the screen, then froze. What is it? I whispered. They looked at me, and for the first time I sensed fear in them. They found the box. My heart dropped. The wooden box? I asked, my voice barely audible. They know it's missing, the person said. And they know you took it. Oh. I didn't tell anyone. You didn't have to, they said. They'd been monitoring the house. A cold wave swept over me. Someone had been watching us. Watching me. Even before my parents left. What do I do? I whispered, almost shaking. The person stepped closer, lowering their voice. You have to leave with me. Right now. Before they catch up. Where? I asked. Somewhere your parents prepared for you. A place they never told you about. The idea that my parents had a backup plan for me, a secret one, made my lungs feel tight. But before the person could say anything else, footsteps echoed at the end of the alley. Not one pair. Several. Coming fast. The person looked at me with urgency. Run. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I just ran as hard as I could, feeling the darkness closing in behind me, the sound of footsteps getting closer, and the terrifying realization that the danger wasn't just here. It was catching up to me. And whatever truth my parents were hiding was about to collide with my life in a way I wasn't ready for. I stood frozen in that warehouse, staring at the two people who were supposed to be a memory by now. My parents looked tired, older than I remembered, but their eyes were the same, filled with worry, guilt, and something deeper that I couldn't read. For a moment, none of us moved. It felt like the world had paused just so I could take in the truth I'd waited years to hear. My hands shook a little, not from fear, but from everything that had been building inside me since I was 13. Before I could say anything, my mother's voice cracked through the silence, soft and trembling, like she wasn't sure if she had the right to speak to me. She whispered my name the way she used to when waking me for school, and hearing it made my chest tighten in a way I didn't expect. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand why they disappeared, why they left me without a single answer, why I had to grow up replaying that one letter over and over in my head. But when they stepped closer, I saw the fear in their eyes, not fear of me but fear of what they were about to tell me. They told me they didn't leave because they wanted to. They left because they had no choice. They said they had tried to come home, tried to contact me, but every attempt put me in danger. I didn't understand any of it at first. It sounded like excuses, like words practiced too many times. But when my father pulled out a small envelope, old and worn at the edges, something shifted inside me. He handed it to me with shaking fingers. Inside was another letter. Their real goodbye. A letter they said they wrote but couldn't deliver. My heart raced as I opened it, expecting explanations, apologies, something that made sense. But the letter wasn't what I imagined at all. It wasn't long and it wasn't emotional. Instead, it had a list of names and numbers I didn't recognize, along with an address I'd never seen before. I looked up, confused, but before I could ask anything, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the building. My mother grabbed my arm and pulled me behind a stack of crates. The fear in her eyes suddenly made sense. They told me the people they were running from had found them again. They hadn't planned to show themselves to me like this. They were supposed to meet me in private, explain everything safely. But whoever had been following me had led real danger right to their door. My brain felt like it was spinning. I wanted to leave, to run somewhere safe, but they insisted this was the moment everything had been leading up to. My father whispered that the list in the letter wasn't just names and numbers, it was the reason they disappeared. It was connected to something they discovered years ago, something someone powerful didn't want exposed. And somehow, without knowing it, I had been pulled into the center of it. The footsteps grew louder. Someone shouted. My mother pressed her finger to her lips, signaling me to stay silent. My breathing felt loud in my own ears. The warehouse lights flickered again, and I could hear doors slamming shut in the distance. Whoever was here wasn't just passing by. They were looking for us. My father leaned closer and said the last thing I expected, that the people searching for us believed I had the key to everything. I didn't know what that meant. I had nothing. No secret. No knowledge. No reason to be involved in any of this. But before I could respond, several shadows moved across the warehouse floor. My parents exchanged a look, one I recognized instantly. It was the same silent communication they used when I was little, when something serious was happening and they didn't want to scare me. My father whispered that no matter what happened next, I needed to trust the information in the letter. That list was my protection. My mother squeezed my hand gently, her eyes filling with tears. She apologized for every year they missed, every birthday, every moment they weren't there. She told me they stayed away because they wanted me to live a normal life, even if it meant losing me in the process. I didn't know whether to forgive them or stay silent. My emotions were twisted, confusing, too heavy to sort through. Before I could speak, the warehouse door slammed open so hard the wall shook. Light flooded in, followed by several figures dressed in dark clothing. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my throat. My parents pushed me farther behind the crates, shielding me with their bodies even in the middle of the danger. One of the figures shouted their names, demanding they come out. My father held up his hands and slowly stepped into view. My mother followed him, but not before turning back to me one last time with a look I couldn't decipher. Part love, part fear, part something else entirely. The moment they stepped into the open, everything felt unreal. The voices were sharp, accusing, but I couldn't understand half of what they were saying. Something about stolen information. Something about evidence. Something about a deal that never should have happened. My parents didn't argue. They didn't defend themselves. They just stood there, calm and quiet, as if they had been preparing for this moment for years. My stomach twisted when one of the men grabbed my father by the arm. I almost jumped out from hiding, but my mother subtly shook her head at me. Then, in the middle of all the shouting, something unexpected happened. One of the men pulled out a phone, glanced at the screen and suddenly froze. His whole expression changed. He looked at my parents, then at the other men, then back at the phone again. He walked over to the leader and whispered something in his ear. I couldn't hear it clearly, but the leader's reaction made my entire body go cold. His face dropped. He stared at my parents differently, almost like he hadn't expected whatever he had just been told. He looked around the warehouse, scanning the shadows, and said something that made every muscle in my body lock. "Where's the kid?" My breath caught in my throat. My hiding spot suddenly felt way too small, way too exposed. My mother took a step forward, blocking their line of sight. But the leader wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking around, searching for me. And then he said something that completely changed everything I thought I knew about why my parents had disappeared. He said I wasn't just caught in the middle of this. I was the reason everything started. And before I could even process what that meant, one of the men turned toward the crates where I was hiding, and started walking straight toward me. The moment the man stepped toward the crates where I was hiding, my heartbeat felt so loud it almost drowned out everything else. My legs were shaking, but I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I kept telling myself maybe he wasn't actually coming for me, maybe he was just checking the area. But then he stopped right in front of me and I knew there was no more pretending. He pulled the crates aside just enough to look me directly in the eyes. I froze. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I thought everything was about to end right there. But the man didn't grab me. He didn't shout. He didn't even look angry. His expression was complicated, almost sad. He said my name softly, my full name as if he'd known it for years. I didn't know how to react. I felt confused and scared, but something about his voice didn't match the panic happening around us. Before I could speak, the leader of the group walked over and ordered him to step aside. He didn't. Instead, he told the leader that harming me wasn't an option anymore, not after what he had just learned from the message on his phone. The warehouse fell into a strange silence. My parents exchanged a confused look, and so did the rest of the men. The leader looked annoyed, but the man with the phone held his ground. He said something I'll never forget. He said the truth had come out, something that changed not just their mission but the entire story I thought I knew. He explained that the information my parents had been protecting all these years wasn't dangerous. It was proof of a massive financial crime committed by people far above the men standing in the warehouse now. My parents weren't running from justice. They were running from corruption. The worst part? The people who had framed my parents had used my name as leverage. They made it seem like my parents took evidence connected to me so the people chasing them believed I held the key to everything. That was why they needed to know where I was. Not to hurt me, but to find out if I had anything that could expose them. The man lowered his voice and said the higher authorities had just stepped in after reviewing new evidence. My parents were no longer the targets. The real criminals were being taken down. Everything inside me felt like it dropped all at once. For the first time since I was 13, something made sense. The list in the letter, the secret, the years of hiding, it all connected. My parents weren't perfect, but they hadn't abandoned me out of selfishness. They were protecting something bigger than themselves and somehow protecting me too. The leader, now looking frustrated and unsure, ordered his men to stand down. They backed away slowly as if the ground beneath them had shifted. My mother rushed toward me, pulling me into her arms so tightly it almost hurt, but I didn't complain. My father joined us a moment later, placing a shaking hand on my back. None of us spoke right away. It was like we were scared the moment would disappear if we moved too fast. Eventually, the man who found me apologized, not in a dramatic or emotional way, but with a quiet sincerity that made me believe him. He explained that they weren't the enemy I thought they were. They were misled, manipulated by people who had used my parents as scapegoats. He assured us that the real authorities were already on their way, not to arrest us, but to secure my parents' testimony and guarantee our safety. For the first time in years, the fear that had followed me finally loosened its grip. When the authorities arrived, everything felt surreal. They treated my parents with respect, not suspicion. They checked on me, asked if I was okay, and told me the nightmare was over. They escorted all of us out of the warehouse, and stepping into the daylight felt like stepping into a different life. A life where I wasn't just a kid abandoned by mysterious parents, where I was part of the truth that finally came out. It took weeks for everything to settle. My parents were placed under protection while giving their testimony. The people responsible for forcing them into hiding were finally exposed and arrested. The names on the list? They belonged to whistleblowers, witnesses, and investigators who had been pressured or silenced. My parents had been trying to protect them too. That was the secret they carried all these years. During that time, I stayed close to them, slowly rebuilding a connection that had been shattered. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when I felt angry or hurt. Losing years of my childhood wasn't something I could erase with one explanation. But I saw the truth in their eyes every time they spoke. They wished they could have protected me without disappearing. They wished they could have stayed. And a part of me finally believed that. One evening, after everything calmed down, my father sat beside me and handed me the original letter they'd left when they disappeared. He asked if I still hated them for it. I read it again, but this time with the context of everything that happened. The handwriting was rushed, panicked, desperate. They were trying to say goodbye without actually saying goodbye. I folded it slowly and told him the truth. I didn't hate them. I just wished I had known the real story sooner. My mother hugged me from the side and whispered that she wished the same thing. In the months that followed, life felt quieter, lighter. My parents and I started talking about normal things again, the future, school, even silly memories from when I was little. We laughed more than I thought we ever would. The fear that once surrounded everything finally faded into something like peace. And every now and then, when I caught my parents looking at me with a kind of grateful relief, I realized they weren't just rebuilding their lives, they were rebuilding mine too. The final twist came unexpectedly during one of the follow-up meetings with the investigators. They revealed that the man who found me in the warehouse, the one who changed everything, had actually been the anonymous whistleblower who first tried to expose the corruption years ago. He had been trying to protect my family from the shadows long before any of us knew his name. Without him, my parents might still be hiding and I might still be living in uncertainty. He didn't ask for credit and he didn't stay in touch. He just quietly told us he was glad we were safe. Now, as I look back on everything, I understand the story differently. It wasn't just about disappearance or mystery. It was about sacrifice, truth, and the painful choices people make when they're trying to protect what matters most. I lost a lot during those years, but I gained something too. A deeper understanding of my parents, of myself, and of the strange way life tests us. And even though the past still hurts sometimes, I finally feel like the story that began when I was 13 has found its ending. Not a perfect one, but a real one. One where the truth finally came home.